Are you hesitating to tune your Holley EFI system because you're not confident with computers? You're not alone. After helping thousands of people learn how to tune, this is one of the biggest fears or roadblocks that I see preventing people from getting started. But here's the thing. You don't need to be a computer nerd at all in order to tune your own car. I'm not a computer nerd at all. And in today's video, I'm going to walk you through the basics and show you exactly how little computer knowledge you actually need in order to get started. And by the end, hopefully you'll see that tuning isn't nearly as intimidating as it seems from at least a computer standpoint. Just a warning, this video is going to be very, very basic. So if you're an advanced user, this might not be the video for you. I just don't want to waste your time. So if you want to start tuning your Holley EFI system, the first thing that you need to do is you need to familiarize yourself with all of the Holley specific terminology. So to help you with that, if you click the first link in the description, I've made up a list of 100 different terms along with their definitions, kind of a description of what they are. So just click the first link in the description. I'll send that over to you. It's completely free. I've sent this to about 14,000 people so far, so don't be shy. So the next thing that we need to do is realize that the 3.5-inch touchscreen is great for what it is. It's awesome that it's included with the kit. Gives you an opportunity to obviously see and monitor what's going on with the engine real time. And the wizard giving you the ability to get your car started and up and running just by answering a few questions is great. However, when it comes to actually tuning, I would go as far as saying that you can make changes with a 3.5-inch screen, but you can't really tune with the 3.5-inch screen. So it works great if you just want to make small little tweaks here and there, things like that, but you're just limited on what you can do, what you can see, being able to use a mouse, being able to actually fine tune large tables, things like that. And the other thing is when we're tuning, we're actively opening data logs and the tuning software at the same time and kind of having those side by side so that we can view the data, make the changes. And it all just becomes so difficult and limited when using the 3.5-inch screen that, again, I would go as far as saying that you can't really tune with it, you can just make adjustments. Another thing worth noting, in case you're not familiar, the system is a little bit misleading with their self-tuning terminology, which it does have a learn table, which is a long-term fuel trim that can be applied to the main fuel table, and it works good for what it is, but if not used properly, it can do more harm than good. And more importantly, if you are just relying on this to tune the vehicle, you're going to have a rough time.
Piece of shit.
Maybe on something with a stock or very, very mild camshaft, you might get away with it. But the larger the cam, usually the more difficult it becomes just with tuning in general. And then obviously you start adding forced induction and things of that nature. You can't expect the quote unquote self-tuning to handle all of that. If it was that easy, then none of us tuning cars for a living would have jobs. And on top of that, the self-learning, self-tuning, whatever you want to call it, does not have the ability to troubleshoot. And the reality of it is 9 times out of 10, when there's what appears to be a tuning problem with a car, it's usually a problem with the car itself that needs to be fixed before the tuning can actually be done properly. So if we're not going to use our 3.5-inch screen for tuning, we have 2 separate options. One I highly recommend and one I don't recommend at all. The one I do not recommend is you can actually take the SD card out of the 3.5-inch screen, put it into a computer, make your changes in the computer software, upload it to the card, take it back out of the computer, and then put it back in the 3.5-inch screen. It sucks even just saying it. It's 1,000 times worse actually doing it. It is cool to have that option, you know, if you're in a pinch and you need to get yourself out of a situation. But again, if you really want to take advantage of the system that you bought, this cable that I do feel that should be included with the Holley kits, but it's not. It is an additional purchase, but you need a USB to CAN cable. So it has this end of the cable here, which will just plug in directly where you unplugged your 3.5-inch screen. And then the bigger end goes into a computer. In addition to this, if you want to be able to use the laptop and the 3.5-inch screen at the same time, they do offer splitters, and then you can plug in everything all at the same time. So another cool option to at least be able to keep the 3.5-inch screen plugged in while you're tuning. All right, so now that we have our cable, we need a computer to plug it into.
Well, duh.
And this is one of the most common questions I get asked as far as like, what computer should I get? What specs do I need? And the reality of it is that Holley basically will work with any computer. It doesn't require any fancy specs or anything like that. So I did look up the specs, and you can see here that the only requirement is that it has just 4 gigabytes of RAM. And if I'm being completely honest, I didn't even know they made computers with only 4. I thought they only had 8. I'm not a computer guy at all, but let's take a look real quick and see what our options are. This is the shittiest place I could think to go. So kind of to my surprise, there are plenty of 4 gigabyte options. I think looking back at it, and when I was buying computers a long time ago before I even knew what the hell any of that meant, I probably had plenty of lower end computers that only had 4 gigabytes of RAM, but I typically will go after something that has at least 8 now. There isn't a huge price difference, but if you're really struggling for cash, then the 4 gigabyte will work just fine, especially if Holley is the only program that you have open at the same time. This computer that I'm currently using, I think has 16 gigabytes of RAM. I did have to go to something a little more powerful because I'm always screen recording and running 30 different things all at the same time. But I actually would encourage you to only have one software open at a time, unless you're in a situation like me where you kind of don't have a choice but to do numerous things all at once. Outside of that, the computer itself doesn't really matter so much. I would try to get something with a solid state drive if possible. And battery life is probably something that's pretty important to a lot of people, so you can keep an eye on that. Screen size, depending on your eyesight, might play a role in it, but keep in mind if you go too big on the screen size, then it actually becomes too big and bulky inside of the car and it becomes super annoying. So you kind of have to use your own judgment on that. It's totally personal preference. And one more thing to keep in mind is if like you're at the racetrack all the time, you don't have an enclosed trailer to escape into, then the brightness of the screen might be important to you, as some of the ones that are a little bit dim can make it really difficult to see what's on the screen in the bright sunlight.
I can't see shit.
With all that being said, I have had the best luck, well maybe not the best luck, but I've been the happiest with Dell laptops for whatever reason. This computer I'm using right now is a ThinkPad. And if I'm being honest, I only bought this because I see everybody ranting and raving about them. I haven't been overly impressed with this. I mean, it does what I need it to do, but I do think that my kind of frustrations with it are probably more Windows 11 based than they are with the actual laptop itself. So I prefer Windows 10 over Windows 11. And I think some of the Holley documentation hasn't been updated. I think it says it only works up to Windows 10, but I've tuned plenty of cars using Windows 11 without a problem. Another question I get asked when it comes to computers all the time is if they will work with the Mac, which is not a Holley specific question. It is a Windows specific question. So this is my first Mac. I have never put any of the crap on it to make Windows work. There are programs that you can get Windows-based systems to work, but I think that there's depends on the chip in the computer or whatever the case may be. I don't know. Just do yourself a favor. And if you're going to buy a laptop, just get one with Windows on it, just a cheap one for tuning. You can go down that road if you want, but I'm sure if you YouTube how to get Windows on your Mac, you can answer all of those questions that way. Another thing people ask is, can you use a tablet instead of a laptop? Again, as long as it has a USB port and it's Windows based, it shouldn't be a problem. I have tuned a few cars using other people's computers and that's what they've had. And I don't really like it. They just feel cheap and flimsy and the keyboards are kind of janky. And I would encourage you to just get a laptop, a couple $100 for a used or a cheap one. It's well worth the money. All right, now we have our cable and we have our computer. The next thing that we need to do is we need to actually put the software onto our computer. So for this, we're gonna head over to Holley's website, which is just holley.com. And we're gonna go up here to this right corner and we're gonna click on support. Then we're gonna go down here to fuel injection. And now you are going to choose whichever system it is that you have. Typically that's gonna be Sniper, Sniper 2, HP and Dominator, or the Terminator X. And depending on which one you have, which one you click on, the process is going to be the same. So let's just do Terminator X. So once you're into this page where you can see, you can click on all of these different things and download what you need. And the further down you go, you can see this is Terminator X V1, V2. So usually the newest stuff is at the top. And we want the laptop-based software. So I feel like they could sometimes word these things a little bit better to make it a little bit more kind of obvious, but we don't want the dash. We don't want this revision log. We don't want the SD card content right now. And we don't want this either. So this here, and you can see right here, it says software. So this is the most recent version of this software. So this would be what you want to click on. So I already have this installed on the computer, so I'm not going to do it again. And it looks like I haven't downloaded the Sniper 2 software on this laptop yet. So let's just go ahead and do that. So we'll click on Sniper 2, click on software. Up here it's downloading. Click on that. Just click yes here. Next. Next. I would encourage you to leave this checked on, then you'll just have the icon on your desktop. Next. Install. Next. And looks like we gotta close some stuff, which might screw up our video here. That's moving forward. If you get this, just click on repair. Click close. Install. Next. Finish. Finish. And let's see if it'll launch, which it did. So that process is basically exactly the same for all of the different systems. So that should get you going on that. Now, the only thing that might kind of present itself as a problem here, and we're going to cover it in this video as Holley has a video walking you through exactly how to do it, is depending on which version of the software you just downloaded and which version of firmware that your actual ECU or unit has on it. If those don't match, then you're going to have to update the firmware. So I'll show you which video you can follow the instructions on. It's directly from Holley, so you know you can trust it. So the next thing that we need to do is we have to actually plug our cable into the computer. And you see this has all of the Holley cables that I've seen have the bigger style USB plug on it. And if your computer, for whatever reason, doesn't have that port, they make these adapters. You can see it's got the big end on one side and the small end on the other. In a perfect world, you don't use adapters when you don't need to. But if you're in a bind, then that's usually something that can get you through. So now I'm going to go ahead and get us connected to a Terminator X ECU. Again, regardless of which system you have, this process is going to be the same. All right, we have our Terminator X software open. We have the ECU powered up. Essentially, this is the equivalent of being in your car with the key on, but the engine not running. So let's plug our cable in. And if you see here, this says download from ECU and it's grayed out. If this thing's going to want to cooperate with us, once we plug the cable in, you should see that this should no longer be grayed out. So once you're on the screen, you can obviously read what it says, but open global file would mean like we have a file saved on the computer and that's what we want to open. Open data log, obviously we're opening a data log. Create new global file can be a little bit misleading. If you're getting ready to like start up this car for the first time, you might think that you would want to create a new global file. But this gives you one that's basically like zeroed out and you'd have to manually enter in all of your own stuff, which I do not recommend at all. So you kind of have two options if you're starting from scratch. One would be to do a wizard tune, which is going to be the easiest option using the 3.5-inch screen, or you can go to open global file and use kind of one of the startup maps that are in there. But for the time being, let's assume that you did use the wizard tune and you have uploaded that to the computer from the 3.5-inch screen. So what we would want to do at that point is actually download from ECU. So that's going to take the file that's in the ECU and is going to bring it over into the computer. So let's do that now. And our 12-volt wire is not working, it appears. All right, remember how I said that 9 times out of 10, if there's a problem, it's usually with the car and not with the tuning software? Well, multimeter saved the day. I just moved everything from the shop to my house as far as my little bench test setup here goes. I forgot the charger like an idiot, and I stole a charger from something else. Turns out, even though it's plugged into the wall, it's only outputting 5 volts and not 12 volts. So I stole another charger, and now we should be back in business. So let's try to connect here again. Okay, now that we have 12 volts going to the ECU, we're going to try this again. So we're going to go to download from ECU. And it's giving us a warning here that we need to do a TPS Auto Set, so we'll cover that. Click OK, and now it's going to download from the ECU. Now, absolutely, positively, step number 1, once you get to this point right here, is we need to save this file. And this is probably where we get into the most computer nerd aspect of all of this, believe it or not. It just comes into the file management. And Holley's file management is a little bit kind of, I don't know, more janky than some of the other systems out there. So let's take a look at this real quick. So the way I would recommend going about this would just be to use this file icon or whatever up here. But if you go down on the bottom of your screen, you also have the File Explorer. You probably can't see mine because it's cut off from the recording, but that's another way that you can access where all of this stuff is. But if we go into File, what we want to do here is we want to hit Save Global File As. And this is going to save this as a new file name. And I would recommend saving this as something, you know, as like your starting point or basically like a default. And you can see here that, and this is what I mean by Holley's structure is a little bit weird because we just clicked this to save it, but it's trying to save it into the firmware folder. So if you can see, you keep going to the left, eventually you get to where there's just Holley. And the Holley folder is actually hidden within the Documents folder, which is a little bit weird. So the other thing you can do is if you don't see basically any of what I'm talking about here, if you go over to the left, we want to click on Documents. And we're already in Documents, so nothing changed. So let's go to Desktop, and then we'll go to Documents. And now you can see we have different stuff. And obviously we want to go to Holley because that's what we're using. And then you want to use whichever system it is that you're using. So in this case, we're using Terminator X v3. Then we want to go to Global Files. And since this is a custom calibration, it's one that we're already modified or we're going to modify it, I would recommend saving it in that folder. And you can also start new folders if you want. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do a new folder. And this is the ECU I use for T3. So we're going to create that folder there. And we can double click on that. And you can just give it a name. So what I would recommend you do is give it a name like Wizard Default File, assuming that you used a Wizard file. Or if you had your cartoon and you just want to be able to touch it up, you can put like Dino Tune Final Default. And we can save that. Sometimes you'll get this warning if you have some inputs and outputs that aren't mapped. It doesn't matter, just click yes. And now what I would do is I would actually go through the exact same process and save this again with a different name. So go to File, Save Global File As, and at this point it brings us back to where we just were. So instead of Final, you can give this a name, something like Modified Revision 1. Click Save. So now, if let's say you're new to this and you start modifying this folder or this file that we have just created, just made, or whatever, and you completely screw it up, now all you have to do is go back to File, open Global File. Here's the folder that we just used. And if you don't see the folder that you wanted to use, you can go Choose or Create New Directory. And this kind of brings up this whole tree thing. So again, we have Documents, Holley, Terminator X v3, Global Files. Click on the little arrow. Here's our T3 ECU. Click OK. And now we have our default here. So if we click Open, now we can go back to where we had our file that we knew that actually ran good. Now that file management, like I said, is probably the most computery side of what you're going to need to actually know how to do within Holley. There's some other stuff we're obviously going to cover here in a second, but that's the most complex thing. So if you can handle that, you should be in good shape. And if not, and you want to know more specifics on that, I'm sure you can just kind of Google or YouTube File Explorer Windows. You know, this is Windows 11, so you can do it that way. Now, just to really drive this point home, since this is the hardest part, if we just want to access our folders or whatever files without actually being in the Holley software, you can click on the File Explorer. Again, you can't see mine. It's just the little yellow looking folder down in the taskbar. And then we can go to File Explorer right here. Mine shot over on my other monitor, so I'll drag it back over here. Now you can see we have basically all the same stuff. So we want to go to Documents, Holley, V3, Global Files. Here's the folder that we made. And here is all of our files that we just made. And now you'll see when you go to it this way, you get this, the .trx file, TERX. And then you get this other one that has this info on it. So I get it all the time where people will actually email me this info file, and you don't need that. The one that's just the TERX is the one that you need and the one that you would send. You can't open this. This is just a text file, so it doesn't contain what you need. So if you open that, it just opens it up in Notepad and gives you a bunch of kind of meaningless crap for most situations. There you go. So now you are an expert at the Holley folder management system, and you should be able to navigate through that. And hopefully at this point, just that in itself, knowing that that's the most complex part and it's not that bad. So hopefully some of your fears of the computer side of this are not quite so bad anymore. All right, the next thing I'm going to show you, don't get mad at me. If you're familiar with this, you are going to be insulted, but I have the conversation with people weekly where they have no idea what I'm talking about. So if we take a mouse, we look at it, you can see we have two different buttons on here. One is on the left side and the other is on the right side. And if we push the one on the left, it's called a left click, which is usually just kind of referred to as clicking the mouse. That's the one you use 99% of the time. But this one over here on the right side is called right clicking. And it actually opens up a whole new menu on a lot of different places. So your laptop, if you're not using an external mouse, I don't know that you call it external, but even your laptop, whatever, God damn it. So even if you're not using an external mouse or whatever you want to call that, your laptop also has a left click and right click. So let's take a look at that real quick. All right, so the easiest place to figure out where this is going to do something is if we go to a fuel table. I have no idea what this file is, so just ignore all of that. So if we left click, you can see we're clicking on something, or in the table, we're highlighting a cell. Now, if you click somewhere and you hold down the left mouse button and you drag it, now you're going to highlight a whole section of the table. Now, what I'm referring to with right clicking is if we right click on this highlighted area, you can see it brings up several different options. So you can cut, copy, you can turn the colors on and off, but these fill row values, fill column values, and the offset and the smoothing, these are very, very helpful features. And you can see over here, we actually have a hotkey for a majority of those features. But this is how you save yourself a ton of time when you're tuning. So I'm in our default file right now. So I'm going to open up our modified file so we don't break our default file. I'm going to show you kind of how this works. So let's just do 0 here, and we'll do 100 here. So if we highlight in between here, and we right click, we go to fill row values. So rows are going to be left to right, and columns are going to be up and down. So basically horizontal and vertical. Most systems use H and V as the hotkeys, which is much easier to remember, but I think engineers think a little bit differently than us idiots. We'll right click and we'll hit fill row values. And fill is kind of another word. Again, most other ECUs would use interpolate. Holley uses fill, but you're going to see it's going to blend that. So now it blended everything for us. And the other thing that you can do is you can highlight an area, you can hit smooth, or you can hit smooth up here. And yeah, so it filled in all of that for us, and it's a huge time saver. Also, so I've watched in a lot of people tuning cars that are new to this and stuff. You'll see this a lot in the timing table, is they will go cell by cell and type like 19, and then they'll type 20, then they'll type 21, and you'd be there until you're dead doing it that way. So if you want to change a bunch of numbers at the same time, if you highlight it, right click, And then you go here to offset selected. Now you can do sort of whatever math feature that you want to do. So if we wanted to add 2 degrees of timing to all of the highlighted cells, we can just hit +2, hit OK, and now we just saved ourselves at least 4,000 hours of manually upping each one of those numbers by 2. And another thing people don't seem to know that exists, again, if we highlight something and we hold Control and we push up, you can see that the numbers are increasing. And if you hit down, the numbers are decreasing. I typically only use up and down, but if you hold Control and use the left and right arrow keys, it goes in larger increments. But I've just got accustomed to using up and down and just pushing the button more times if I need to make a larger change. Now, right click can also be helpful for other things, like if we wanted to have our base fuel table and our fuel graph open at the same time. If we right click on fuel graph, you can see it pops up over here. And if we want to turn this off, we can just click over here. I don't think this has been implemented into the Sniper software yet. And another way that right click can be helpful, you see this in boost control all the time, is sometimes you can see that all of these dots are spaced out evenly. Sometimes they'll all like pile up right on top of each other. So if you keep your mouse like right here in the middle of the table and you right click, you actually have this axis or this option down here to space X axis evenly, and that will help you out. So there we go. If we turn that off, you can see it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I don't know why this wouldn't just be the default, but apparently Holley has a reason why that is. So again, sorry if I am insulting you by telling you what right click on the mouse is, but I promise you I have lots of people that I deal with on probably a weekly basis that have no idea what I'm talking about when I say right click. So the more people that we can help and get them to take advantage of their entire system, the better off we're going to be. I almost forgot to show you the TPS Auto Set. This kind of hangs some people up too. It's probably a little more obvious on how to do it on the handheld, but if you want to do it with your laptop, this is how we do that. So go up to USB link here again, and it's going to yell at us that we need to do the TPS Auto Set. Click OK. I'm just going to get from the ECU because everything I just did to it doesn't make any sense. It was just for demonstrative purposes. So now we have this. So to do our TPS Auto Set, we go up here to Sync with ECU, go to TPS Auto Set, click OK. Actually, let me zero out my TPS first. All right, so we click OK. And then we need to go from 0% throttle to 100% throttle, which is essentially pushing the pedal down. We need to do that twice. So we'll click Start. And this is giving me an error that it's seeing engine RPM because we're using a simulator and not an engine. So you have to do this with the engine turned off. So let me turn down the RPM. All right, let's try this again. We'll click Start. Open the throttle all the way. Close it. Open the throttle all the way. Close it. Click Done. Now our TPS Auto Set was successful. Okay, the next thing that we're going to take a look at is the data logger. And if you're not using this, then you paid a whole bunch of money for a system and you're using a small fraction of what it can do. So highly encourage you to get familiar with this. We're just going to run through this pretty quick, but this is like a mandatory you have to use it feature. All right, so if we want to start a data log while we are using the laptop software, we're actually just going to click on this little clipboard looking icon thing here. And you can see I'm just going to move the RPM a little bit here so we have something to look at. Be cool if they rev that fast, huh? So now to stop the data log, we're just going to click on the same icon. And we're back into that same folder management thing. You can see here that this is actually in the correct folder this time in data logs. But let's just go through that process again in case it doesn't save where you want it to save. So same thing, we're going to go to Documents, Holley. We're using V3, so we're going to click on that. I'm going to go to Data Logs. And I generally will start a new folder for each. Your file naming system is a different video entirely, but if you're only doing your own car, it doesn't quite matter. It's still good to name things something that makes sense. But when you're doing a lot of different cars, I'll start a new folder for each car, each customer. So we'll just do T3 ECU, double click on that, and we'll give it a name. And we'll click Save. So now you're like, that's great, but where is my data log? So what we have to do to actually view it is go up to data log, open data log, and same thing. Usually, if you've already saved the file, it will usually just pull it up into the file that you want, or into the folder that you want to be in. But again, if it doesn't, then you just go through that same process again. Here's the file that we just created. So you can either double click on it or click on it and click open. And one thing that is nice about Holley is some other systems will actually have two separate softwares, one for the tuning, one for the data log. Holley has both of them in the same, which I really like. It does, however, open them in two separate windows. So we'll click open. Now here is our data log. Like I said, the data logger is a whole different video entirely, but just so you have somewhat of an idea, you can turn channels off and on over here. And if you click on this E right here, it's going to give you all of your channels and whatnot. And if you don't know what any of this stuff is, make sure you click the link below and I'll send you the list of what all this stuff does. So what's nice with this is anything that you want to, so anything with a green check mark is already over here, and anything that isn't, obviously isn't. But all you have to do with these is drag and drop. So whatever it is that you want to look at, you can do that. And you have all of these different kind of like layouts. So then you just click OK, just click save. And then now you can toggle through the different layouts like this. So you can look at a lot of different things at different times. So now within the data log, another thing that you want to do comes back to our right click. If you right click on here, you get a whole bunch of different options. So you can play with all of that stuff. You can zoom in, you can zoom out. This one goes to the last zoom. So like if you accidentally fat finger it and zoom all the way in or something, if you just click that, it'll go back to where it was. And there's just, again, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do in here. The comparison feature is great. If you click on that, compare data log. I don't have another one here, but if you click on a second log, then it will open them both up. And the comparison will have a dotted line. So it makes it nice and easy to compare two things. And if you go into tools, there's some different stuff in here. And if we go to file, we have our usual save and save as. So if you make changes to a data log, like say it's a 20-minute long log and you chop it up to where it's only a 5-minute log, you can either save, which will override the existing one, or what I would recommend is you do save as and give it a different name. And then this is also another way to kind of quickly pull up old logs without having to go through that whole file structure. And if you go to properties, it gives you some different notes and some different, there's all kinds of stuff hidden in here. That's why I say this is a whole video in itself. But this data log property is a nice one where you keep notes and you do all kinds of cool stuff. And the more organized you are with a data logger, the better off you're going to be, because you might think that you can remember everything, but when you had your car for 3 years, you're not going to go back and look at an old log. One other thing that I always tell people to do that can be super helpful is, just like I told you, to save a default of the actual configuration or the global file. If your car is running good right now, go drive it around, and in as many different conditions as you can think of, either save like one data log for it or save multiple data logs of the car running good, and save those, put them in a folder that you can go back and reference those. That way, if the car ever starts running bad, then you can open up your bad running data log and your good running data log, and then you can compare them. And it's a good way to see what's different and why is the car running bad all of a sudden. And one more thing with the data logger, in case you're not familiar, is it can be super annoying if you don't know this, but toggling back and forth between the file and the log can be super annoying. So if you actually go up here to this, I don't know, this one's called minimize. I don't know what this other one's called. If you click on that, it'll make it smaller, and then you can move it around. And I have multiple monitors hooked up at the same time right now. So usually if you just make this smaller and you drag it all the way over to the right, it'll kind of snap itself into place. But since I have multiple monitors hooked up, it's just trying to dump it over on the other screen. But like if you wanted to keep track of, where you're at on the fuel table while you're moving through a log, this makes it significantly easier. And another thing that you can do while you're at this point is if you click on data log and you click activate overlay, you can see we have a green line and we have this ball. So if we click through the data log, you'll watch the ball move around, and it's actually not doing it right now because I'm still online here. So you have to turn your online off. So now, as you can see, as we click through the data log, while we're at this point in the data log, we're at this point in the tune file. So this makes making adjustments significantly easier. Hopefully this video will make you feel a little less intimidated when it comes to the computer side of getting started tuning your car. Obviously, it's impossible to cover everything in one video. So if you are interested in learning more, I do have an online training program that has literally hundreds of videos breaking everything down further. Or if you'd like to learn more just for free on your own, I'll put a playlist for you to check out on the screen with a bunch of other Holley EFI related videos.